Migrating to Australia, the podcast about what you can and can't do when it comes to migrating to Australia, visiting Australia. And tonight, David, even though we're in the midst of lockdown, we've got one of Melbourne's hardest working legal minds. He was reminding me today he had to slug it out at work today while you and I were working from the luxury of our homes. How are you, Mr. David Bongiorno?
Grant, I'm very good, mate. We're very lucky tonight. We've got seriously one of the finest criminal lawyers in the country, Charles Nikakis. Charlie's been practicing criminal law for over 30 years now, Charlie, yeah?
41.
41. There you 41. Go. We've got 41 years of experience in all 41 years of criminal law experience in a 40-minute podcast where today we're going to talk about Victorian law, and it's fitting that Charlie is here because he'll be able to take us through police powers and what can happen when you're arrested. You're not. We want people who are coming to Australia to know what they can do and what they can't do if they're spoken to by the police. And it's probably a perfect time now because those who are new to Australia and resident in Victoria are undergoing stage 4 restrictions, which deprive them of movement. They've got regulations on what they can and cannot do. So, Charlie, let's start with that, shall we?
Well, the most important thing with dealing with the police is your attitude towards them. Police are trained, by and large, to be fairly aggressive towards anybody they stop. So, consequently, if you are subjected to their aggressive nature, they'll keep going and they'll use every means possible to get the result that they want. However, if you demonstrate to them that you're even-headed and calm about what you want to talk about, they will usually back off and slow down as well. The best way to approach them is to be cooperative with them, but not overly. So you're always talking, you answer the questions that they want answered, and if there's any doubt whatsoever about what you want to tell them, you just avoid answering the question and just say, and make them try and answer it for you. And they're a strange group of people who are taught to try and get people to talk. They teach them to get people to talk as long as they possibly can, and on anything. So just keep it nice and short. That's all.
A lot of people, a lot of police have the police been given extra power or special power with the mask, the mandatory mask?
They've got the power to issue fines almost immediately. They obviously sometimes, like I walked out of our building today at lunchtime and I'd forgotten my mask. If some police would fine me immediately, others I would say, listen, I've left it behind, I'm on my way back to get it. They'd say, fair enough, off you go. It depends on the individual involved. But by and large, if you're reasonable to them, they are usually fairly reasonable to you. But
Charlie, I've seen on TV in the last couple of days, since we've got a curfew here for the first time since the Second World War, and it's a really unusual situation for most people in Australia, let alone here in Victoria. But in regards to the mask and also the exercising provisions that we've got and being able to be outside of your home, I've seen on TV in the last couple of days people saying to the police, where do you derive your power? You know, tell me how you can do this. Now, is my understanding correct that when the government declares either a state of emergency or, as we're under now, a state of disaster, there are special provisions that mean that the chief health officer is able to introduce regulations and restrictions that are enforceable by police, and it's not a matter of having to be found somewhere in an act of parliament?
That's correct. And usually the people who ask those questions and make those assertions have no idea themselves.
Well,
And they're just
let's be frank, they're usually idiots, aren't they? I mean, from what I've seen, they're people who watch a lot of American TV, and
that's right.
And they think that we've got constitutional rights.
Yeah. Well, that's a joke. Basically, the police get their power through the legislature, through, as you say, the chief medical officer, and obviously from their own command hierarchy. And yes, they are entitled to do what they can do, but they also are a lot of the time, hopefully, are reasonable about what they want to do and how they want to achieve it. They come across somebody who's questioning their powers in a ridiculous manner of as you indicated. Well, they're not going to treat those people very nicely. They'll just go ahead and do what they want to do. So they've got the power to do it.
Can we talk about the practicalities of the fine? Somebody new to Australia is fined $200 for not wearing a mask. How do they pay it?
Well, I think it's probably one of those on the spot, like those on the spot parking speeding fines. You look on the back; it tells you where to send the money. It'd be collected by Fines Victoria. Obviously, the ticket, when it's given, the police would want to see some form of identification to verify the ID of the person, to verify an address of where they live. And then it's a matter for the individual as to whether or not they pay it. Fines Victoria would probably administer the fine, and ultimately, if they don't pay it, they'll get some correspondence along the line reminding them of it and reminding them that they start clocking up interest payments and further penalties. And ultimately, if they don't pay it, they could be taken to court. But that's a long way down the track.
How a lot of people listening are going to come to Australia, or they're already in Australia pre-lockdown, so they're temporary residents. Now, temporary residents might have a cavalier attitude to being fined on a temporary visa in a foreign country. So, can we take it to the top? How far? What can happen to a temporary resident who refuses to pay, changes address, doesn't notify of change of address, doesn't get the correspondence? How serious can it become?
They've got to catch up to them first.
And if they do?
If they do, they'll probably be able to negotiate their way out of it and pay it. But I wouldn't imagine, I don't think it'd have any implications at all on their immigration status.
It could have if they...
But from a criminal perspective, from a criminal law perspective.
That's not a crime.
No.
They don't pay. I mean, can it be taken to the court? Can they?
Yeah, they can. It can
convert it to community work.
Yeah, well, yes, that's right. It would convert to community work, or alternatively, it could go to the court where they determine how they can get the money back. The courts are more interested in getting the money rather than putting them on community work. But this process that you're talking about, David, could take 3 or 4 years before it gets there. And your temporary resident by that stage has done his course and gone back.
That's it. Yeah, absolutely. So in that sense, it's not really a deterrent, is it?
No. It's a deterrent. It's an on-the-spot deterrent. It'll make you remember the next time. But the ultimate punishment's just not there.
Would it be a deterrent, Charlie, in the terms of someone who studies here then leaves owing a number of fines, say to either Victoria or New South Wales, in, let's say, parking fines or speeding fines? Now, if you owe a debt to the Commonwealth when you try and re-enter Australia, they're going to collect it before they'll let you set foot in the country.
Yeah, but they're state offences.
That was what I was going to ask. Is there any way that the federal government will know about it?
No.
They're not interested, are they? Yeah.
No, they're not. Parking tickets are usually local council things. So, do you think the Commonwealth government could care less about the local council? Don't think so.
I wouldn't be surprised if Mr. Dutton wanted to sniff out everybody who owed money.
Yeah, but Mr. Dutton would also want a commission for doing it. And,
Well,
the local council,
well,
the local councils,
he's a
the
former
local
police
councils aren't
officer,
paid.
so he might know that system well.
Yeah, well, that's true. But I was referring to him getting a bit of the money out of the penalties. Let's not forget, Fines Victoria, who administer all fines in Victoria at the moment, are so far behind in their paperwork it's ridiculous. And the local councils are screaming because they're not getting their revenue. In the past, the fine revenue stream was pretty good for the councils, and it would be constant. They'd be getting money in on a monthly basis. Now, all the money gets taken in by Fines Victoria, who are dragging their feet in handing the money over. So I don't know that if an immigrant from overseas returns to Australia and owes money for parking tickets or any state offence, I don't think the Commonwealth's going to be very interested in it, and it's not going to stop them. And then, even if they do come back to the country, and they do come back to the state or the city in which they were living, how are the authorities here going to know that they're here? They won't.
Charlie, Charlie, if you're in a motor vehicle as a driver or a passenger, so either a driver or a passenger, and the police ask you to identify yourself, what do you have to do?
The driver is obligated to demonstrate that he has a license to drive. So he needs to show his ID.
Is an international license okay, Charlie?
I don't particularly like international licenses. I think international licenses are a method of overcoming people driving properly on the road. I think they're a danger to the community. I think that people who come to this country should be, after 3 months, if they want to drive, should be made to do the test of the local state they're in.
I understood an international license was only a temporary license. It was designed for short-term visitors rather than residents.
Well,
is that right?
It might be, but at the end of the day, there are a large number of people driving around our streets with international driver's licenses or licenses from the country or state they came from, and they have never been altered and never been changed into, say, Victorian licenses. And a lot of these people, unfortunately, don't know the road rules in Australia and therefore are a danger to the community.
So in that situation, if someone's carrying an international license and they've been using it, let's say they're enrolled in a 3-year course and they've been here for 2 years and driving on their international license, are the police entitled to then detain that person if they have no other identification on them while they're in the car, and detain them to find out how long they've been resident in Victoria?
They can't. They don't have the power to detain them. Basically, the licence, albeit from overseas, and an international driver's licence, they would have photo ID on them, and that would be sufficient to identify the person as the driver. They would ask questions like, "How long have you been in the country?" and the person usually would tell.
Do you have to tell the truth?
Away. Well, no, you don't.
Do you have to tell the truth?
You always
don't have to tell the truth. It's a question. It's up to the individual. But if, for instance, the policeman works out that he's been living in Melbourne for over 12 months and driving around on an international driver's license, I'd suggest that he would probably say, if you get back into that car and drive again, I'll charge you with being an unlicensed driver, because the Road Safety Act or even the regulations indicate that if you're living in the state like Victoria and you have been here for longer than 3 months, you're obligated to change your license from another state into a Victorian license.
So there is a statutory time period.
There is. I think it's 3 months. It varies, but anyway.
Okay. Now let's take the car example even further. the policeman asks the driver to leave, get out of the car, and he looks under the seat of the car and there's a package.
You're not allowed to do that.
Tell me why he's not allowed to do that. Tell us why.
A policeman who pulls someone over for a license check is only allowed to look at his license. Once he's determined that who he is and his license status as a traffic offence, he then might ask the driver, can I have a look inside your car? If he says no, the policeman doesn't have the power to search the car. If, however, he was to see sitting on the front seat an ice pipe, then that would give him enough suspicion to be able to search the car without permission. The police have to have a suspicion that an offence is being committed for the purposes of getting the power to search the car. They just can't search the car without permission. But of course, there are always ways around it. And they say to the individual, we're just going to have a look in your car. And before the individual's had time to think about it and say no, they've got the doors of the car open and they're looking. And that happens day in, day out.
Do you think they play hardball with international new Australians because they're not familiar with the law?
Partly that, and partly because the new Australians don't speak fluent English. And as you are well aware, David, police are not the most tolerant people in this world.
Not at all.
And they're interested in getting their job done and over and done with as quickly as possible. So that means if they're going to be aggressive and do what they want to do, so be it. That's what they'll do. As I say, you just got to be careful with them, that's all.
Do these guys and girls who enforce the law out on the roads, do they have quotas to meet?
No, they don't. That's rubbish. I don't know where that came from, but that's not correct. Not at all.
That's good to know.
Charlie, we've cleared up a bit about the right to search. Sometimes I think a check for the roadworthiness of the vehicle is often a sort of a de facto search.
Correct.
Is there a standard that the officer needs to meet before they can just say, we're going to do a check on your vehicle?
Yeah, the standard is how is he feeling on at that particular time. If he's in a hurry, he'll let it go and if he's convinced, or if he convinces himself enough that there's nothing really wrong, he'll just let him go simple. But if he gets suspicious about it, he'll maintain his position for as long as he possibly can, and until he gets to do what he wants to do, that is, search the car. Go on.
Do the police, are they, in this scenario, they search the car, they get permission, or they get de facto permission by compliance, and they're opening the doors and they find things. How freely do they share this information with the Department of Home Affairs?
They don't. Why should they? Again, it's state versus commonwealth. The only way they will share any information with the Department of Home Affairs is if all of a sudden, out of that search, they found someone with a kilo of ice, who then gets himself, he or she gets remanded in custody, and the local copper knows that this bloke has got a dodgy visa. He's not 100% sure about it. He'll use the details, ring the Home Affairs, find out as much as he can about him, and in turn telling Home Affairs what's going on, and their interest is obviously agitated by it, and away you go. Next thing you know, you're deported once you finish your sentence.
That's right.
Sorry.
You go, Grant. You go.
Go on.
Charlie, I'm here on a student visa from a country
Albania.
Albania.
No,
we can do Albania shortly. I'm from a country where most of the residents have brown skin, so I'm coming back from stocking the shelves at my night job, and I'm pulled over by the policeman, and my license is in order because I've been very good, and I went and got my Victorian license from Vic Roads, and my driving record is clean, but I've got a cracked headlight, and the policeman directs me to get out of my car, and he begins to do a roadworthy check, but that is really just an excuse to search the vehicle, and he's popped open the boot and everything. And under my breath, I've said, "Oh, bloody hell." Have I sworn at the policeman?
No.
If I say...
hold on, even that expletives, that's not swearing. And
yep. If I say, "Oh, this is a load of bullshit," no, but I'm just asking if I've got a Mr. Officious policeman, so you know that you know the type, and I've said, "Oh, bloody hell, this is absolute total bullshit." Am I looking? Reasonable people aren't going to charge me.
That demonstrates to him that you've got a little bit of an attitude issue. And so, in turn, he'll become a little bit more aggressive and might say something out of school. It's up to you whether you choose to carry on with it or just leave it alone.
My question really is, though, Charlie, what's the standard nowadays for offensive language?
Oh, that's a subjective test. It's a question of whether you got Miss Prissy's new senior Connie on the job who's never heard it before in her life, or someone who's grown up in Collingwood or Fitzroy and heard it every second day of the week. But it also depends on whether the policeman wants to become nasty and make your life a misery. So he's right, I've got you now, and more often than not, they're not going to touch it.
Can we tease that scenario out a little bit further? When does it turn into a search? Not just a search of the vehicle, but a search of the person themselves? And what is the difference between a frisk and a strip search?
Well, the frisk is they just touch you up and down to see if they've got something. A strip search, as you know, David, is they take all your clothes off and have a good look at you, up, down, up and around and everywhere. To search you, it would have to be a situation where there's suspicion of the motor vehicle in which you were found was founded, and they found something in the car. Then that basically immediately turns their attention upon you, and they would say that you are emptying your pockets, etc., is part and parcel of the search involved looking for drugs. That's the easiest way of doing it. So there you go.
And when does it segue into a strip search? And what are the rules pertaining to a strip search for women? What happens if an Islamic woman is searched by the police? How do they display?
Well, to begin with, they're not going to do a strip search in the street.
No.
You'll be arrested for whatever crime they think that you've committed. Take you back to the station. If they decide to do a strip search before they interview you, and it was a female, then they'd have to have female custody members present to do the search itself, just like they'd have to have male custody members to do the search themselves. In this day and age, a lot of the time they don't do strip searches before the person goes into custody. They do a proper search, and more than a pat-down search, and they do a proper search in itself to make sure you don't have any concealed weapons, or that you may have concealed some drugs in your pockets or on your person. But ultimately, if you're remanded, you are put into the custody area, and I would imagine that's where you're strip searched. Never having experienced it myself.
Thank God. All right. So
who have, but anyway, that's all right.
So, okay. So are they becoming day by day more culturally sensitive, more culturally aware, or is not much changed since I was with you? See, Grant and listeners, I worked with Charlie for just under 7 years, and Charlie made me the lawyer I am, and I think that's a good thing. Charlie you may beg to differ, Charlie.
Have they changed? The police these days are a little bit more tunnel visioned. I can't say they're smarter than they were. They have less tolerance. Culturally, they're probably a bit better than that culturally than they were, because they've got a lot of different ethnic groups represented within the police force now. So, yeah, I think culturally they're doing okay. But their tolerance levels are a lot lower, and they're not smart.
What's that absence of tolerance a consequence of? Are they educated, trained to be less tolerant, or
no?
The day-to-day living.
It's overworked, underpaid. The job they're doing at the moment is not only are they trying to police all the stuff with the COVID virus, they're also trying to police the normal crimes being committed. And the pressures from the top are get results, and to demonstrate how good we are. And so they're working as hard, if not harder, than ever before. And the numbers of police has probably remained the same.
Authorised officers are getting increased powers in this time of COVID. How would somebody new to Australia determine the difference between in an outdoor setting, after hours, it's dark? How would somebody who's not strong with English determine the difference between an authorised officer and a police officer?
You wouldn't.
And that's you'd almost say that's deliberate on their part, because the uniforms are similar.
Well,
their demeanour is similar.
Who's an unauthorised officer? What are you talking about?
The people who patrol the trains.
PSO.
Oh,
PSO. Yeah.
Well, quasi-police. There's no difference between the two. The what?
Wannabe police, plus the banana police, plus the banana police.
Yeah. They have powers on the trains. They have certain powers else in other contexts. There's no difference between them or the police.
And under the state of disaster, they have the same stop and search and move on and all those kind of powers. So
correct.
Move on. Can we touch on move on?
Yeah. What about we've done the car bit. What about if you're walking? It's 5 to 8. Curfew's coming up. I'm finishing off my exercise to get home by 8 o'clock. I'm 5 minutes from home. The divvy van pulls me up at the end of my street.
You better run.
If they stop me for questioning at this current time, what do I have to tell them? It's 5 to 8, so I'm not. Well, I haven't broken curfew.
It depends on what they ask you. Depends on what questions they ask. If they're talking to you about having committed a crime, a specific crime, you'd say nothing.
Yeah.
Am I being arrested? No. Good. See you later. Walk away.
Okay. Are they entitled to ask me my name and where I live?
Yeah.
For this purposes, under this state of disaster, and
not even bother with the state of disaster, they're entitled in the normal course of events to stop you and ask for your name and address.
Okay.
And you must answer.
And you've got to answer, correct.
Okay. And
that's why Eve Black got herself in trouble. Eve Limberio. Eve Black, she was the girl the other day who drove through a roadblock. Where was it, Grant? Down Hastings Way.
Therein was the problem, doesn't it?
She was near Berwick or something, I think.
Near Berwick, and she read from a script, and the cop just waved her through.
And then she went, "Woohoo! See, they're stupid," and put it out on Facebook.
On social media, it went viral.
And anyway, she got arrested.
So they can.
That was bright.
And what she did, she was arrested up in Carlton or Princess Hill a few days later, and police smashed her windows and dragged her out of the car. Police have that power to do that, don't they?
I suspect they do. I don't know it for sure, but I thought smashing the window was a bit over the top, to be honest.
Well, that was
see the cameras were around. That was just stupid.
But there's been a couple of people, and I heard one of the press conferences, I think it was yesterday, where I think it was Dan Andrews or the commissioner explaining that people were stopped at certain places, and when they were asked to identify themselves and produce a license, they refused, window up, and telling the police, you don't have the power to do this. So out came the ASP. So
people who start challenging the powers usually have no idea. Like that woman who was having a go at the poor bugger at Bunnings.
At Bunnings,
not wearing the mask. And
David, did you see that?
The human rights legislation of 1948, and Bonji would know that. It doesn't even exist. It never has.
Crazy stuff.
That's right. It hasn't been ratified in Australia.
It's never been ratified. The human rights legislation we have here is toothless. So,
David, did you see the thing I sent you about the guy who impersonates Chopper doing his take on the Karen at Bunnings?
Chopper's done a Karen on Bunnings video, quite wonderful. Charlie, with a lot of international students come and they're under 18, and they're doing secondary school before they segue into a university degree. Now, Are the police taught to treat them in a different fashion because they're under 18?
Well, the children, in reality, as far as the law is concerned, but they're in that transit period between 16 and 18, and you know as well as I do, the police will bully those sorts of people, whether they be migrant students or just kids walking in the street. They'll bully them to get the job that they want done. So it's hard to know, to be honest. But, again, some of these younger people, they've got great attitudes towards police and others don't. So, and the police just use their natural powers and the natural ability to get what they want.
Now, I'm confronted by two great legal minds here.
Where, Bond? You had another lawyer there, have you?
Grant, when I just under 7 years, I decided that criminal law wasn't for me. Had a great nearly 7 years run with Charlie, and when I told Charlie I was going to do commercial law, Charlie nearly fell off his chair laughing. Everybody else in the criminal law practice did as well. I lasted about 6 months before I moved to immigration. 14 years on, I'm still doing immigration. Commercial law definitely wasn't for me. And Charlie, you knew that all along, didn't you?
Of course. That's why I laughed.
Now, Charlie, let's extend that Bunnings situation a little bit, because that stupid woman who was confronting the Bunnings staff, that kind of thing's been mirrored in Britain and in the States on heaps of examples. Now, in that Bunnings example, that woman was saying, "I have the right to be here. This is a public place." Now, to my understanding, aren't the management of Bunnings entitled to enforce conditions of entry, because it's not a public place in the same way that a footpath is?
It's not a public place, period. It's property owned by Bunnings. The car park that people park in at Bunnings is owned by Bunnings. Simple. It's part of their lease. They have the power to exclude people and the power to allow them in. I thought the poor person at Bunnings was doing a wonderful job in ignoring this idiot, and I was surprised that, and I suppose with retrospect and hindsight, probably the best thing that Bunnings ever did was not bring in security people to take her off the premises. That would have just been giving fuel to the fire. So she just ran out of puff, and that's all there was to it.
Yeah, but so to be clear,
But
a shop is not a public place.
Correct.
A shopping centre, is a shopping centre a public place?
No. The ground floor of Myers in the city is a public place. There are court cases on that. Shoplifting cases.
Okay.
And that's why ultimately the rule of thumb with shoplifting was that if you go step 1 foot outside the shop, that demonstrates that you're going to permanently deprive the owner of that item. So therefore, security guards wait till you get outside. The ground floor of Myers, for instance, you could pick up something at one end and go to the other end and drop it and walk out. You can't be charged.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But from the point of view of a public place, is the ground floor of Myers any different than the ground floor, the entire retail space of the Sunshine Bunnings?
Yes, because the ground floor of Myers has so many people going through it that the courts have said that that's a public place, whereas the retail section of Bunnings is not.
Is that because it's a thoroughfare between the Burke Street Mall and Lonsdale Street and Little Lonsdale?
Correct.
Yeah, okay, Little Burke, yeah.
That's just peculiar to that particular space, nowhere else.
Yeah, yeah. So people can't draw the inference that your local arcade that has a front entrance and a back entrance and a car park, that's not a public place.
No.
Cool.
Police steal your phone, or they don't steal your phone, they confiscate your phone.
Yeah.
How do you get your phone, your wallet, your car keys back from them?
Depends on what you've done.
If you've done something and you're charged and released on bail, is it easy to get?
If you're charged and released on bail, that depends on what you're charged with. If you're charged with anything to do with drugs, your phone will be confiscated and remain in the possession of the police until they've examined it. As you and I both know, Bonge, a lot of people in this world love taking photos of the criminal activity they've been a part of, or keep their text message transactions on the phone. You'll never get the phone back then.
Okay.
If you're on and if they release you on bail and there's nothing on the phone, they might give it back to you. They'll give you your wallet back and your car keys and your keys. It's part of your property. But phones, I reckon the police have got probably thousands, hundreds of thousands of phones stacked away somewhere because my clients get them back.
After you've helped them win a trial, they get them back. I mean, do they do
then the phone's 5-6 years old. Who's going to want such an old thing?
That's true. Very true point.
Yeah.
So people new to Australia, uni student, they're at a party, they're in a room with 20 other people, the ice pipe comes out, but the international student is in the corner and has no idea the ice pipe's out. The coppers kick the door in and start arresting people. What happens? I mean, what does the international student who doesn't know that ice has been consumed on premises, what do they face? What are the risks they face? Proving they had no knowledge?
That's what they have to do, and the only way they can do it is just protest their innocence and get them and say to the coppers, "There's my bag. Search it. Do what you like with it." But I can tell you now, there's nothing in there that relates to smoking ice. I didn't know that was going to happen.
And then magically, a bag of crystals appears in the bag.
Well, I'll put it this way: that I think there'd be enough people in the room who are probably doing something stupid to satisfy the police. So one or two innocents, they'll let go. They won't.
Oh, they will let go.
They won't. They'll let them go. They won't bother them. But
they're not going to rope everybody in.
Nah, not just for the sake of that.
Okay.
You know, if there's if they find, as I said, a kilo of ice in the flat, then everybody's in for trouble.
Okay.
Somewhere along the line.
So it's issue of quantum of drugs and number of people and Okay.
Of course.
All right. Okay. Grant, you got any other questions?
No, I was sort of going to extend that idea of maybe you've got some friends at uni and you know they're a bit dodgy, but you don't know that perhaps they're dealing or their housemate is dealing in a shared house. And
You're
and
talking
you have
about Nicola Gobbo.
it's a nice little learner, they tell me.
She got done for trafficking when she was at uni.
That's right, and then struck a deal.
Yeah, she dobbed in her best friend.
Yeah. So I
go
guess
on.
what I'm saying, Charlie, is if you are, particularly if you're a temporary resident and you're living in a share house and one of the people in the share house is doing dodgy things, the best advice is find a different share house, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Correct. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Without a doubt. The second best piece of advice is make sure your room is locked and no one else has a key.
That's right. And
make sure your room's clean.
And it's very, very hard to prove no knowledge if something is happening regularly in a place that you live.
Oh, you can on the if you're living in a share house and you have an idea that something maybe stupid may be going on and you can't get out, what you need to do is basically put up walls between you and this other person. You need to firstly make sure your room is locked. Make sure you don't leave your items, your identifiable items, in the common area, which can implicate you. If this person lives a different lifestyle to you, they have different hours of operating, make sure you're not around when he or she's doing their dirty business. If they're starting to do things from the house, get up, walk out, go and find one of your friends somewhere else. Distance yourself from it all. That's the best thing you can do until you're able to get out.
Charlie, my last question. Have you got any cautionary tales for temporary residents from your 41 years of criminal law defence work?
Not to be scared of the police. Temporary residents and Asians usually, and you'll know this, are scared of authority and usually talk too much. And the police will use that fear to their advantage. I'm not saying get aggressive to the police, but just make sure that you don't let the police push you around. And don't try and explain anything. Just give them short answers and that's it. Nothing else.
Thanks, Charlie.
Okay.
Grant, you got any more questions?
I was just going to. Charlie's almost answered what I was going to ask. The best couple of words that you need to know when dealing with police are yes and no.
Correct, and that's it. Nothing else. Yes, no, thank you. See you later.
That's right. Yes, no, thank you. Yeah, and there is my license or whatnot.
Yeah, that's right.
Actually,
that's short and sweet.
Actually, there is one more that I've just thought.
Yeah, go on.
Is if you have a driver's license or an international license or anything like that, are there any situations where a local police member, Victoria, New South Wales, Queensland, should be able to ask for your passport if you have other identification?
No, they don't ask for passports. They just ask for ID. And if you've got some form of official looking ID, that should be sufficient. Don't ever give them your passport. Never.
Great. That was what I wanted you to. This is what I wanted you to say. Don't give anyone your passport.
Passport. That's right.
Yeah. Grant, Charlie was the greatest boss I've ever had, and he's been one of the great interviews we've had. Thanks for your time today, mate.
No problem.
Hey, Charlie, you know that was rubbish. The best boss he's ever had is Chloe. So.
She continues to be his boss, poor bastard. See ya.
Ciao, mate. But I tell you, that was good. I mean, what we got from Charlie was some very practical advice, some practical information people who are listening, who are coming to Australia, need to be aware of, or people who are new to Australia have to be aware of. And he raised a very good point, Grant, about police and people come from cultures where police are oppressive in their behaviour, and that the local police use that to their advantage is something everybody needs to be aware of.
Yeah, I think you need to be not assertive, but you need to be confident in your own rights. So we know that they have the power to ask you to identify yourself, which you need to do, and you generally need to comply with the lawful directive. And from what we've found out, that unless they can identify a specific crime, they can't just say, we reckon you're been involved in burglary or shoplifting. They need to tell you where and when before any of these other powers kick in, really. But the state of disaster that we're in now is different, because there are specific powers about limiting our movement and ensuring that we're wearing face coverings, and that we are only, and this is for Victoria and Melbourne only. So
correct.
Sorry for the rest of the country and the rest of the world.
If there's interest, Grant, we will talk to New South Wales and Queensland practitioners in the criminal law space so that we can see what differences there are for people who are migrating there.
Definitely. But for people who don't know why we were doing this particularly, is that at the moment, both you and I are limited to we can only shop within 5 kilometres of our home, but we must shop at our nearest supermarket.
And the other reason too is we're seeing a lot of people, local people, Australian-born Australians, arcing up and misbehaving, and we don't want anyone who comes to Australia to engage in any of the behaviours we're seeing. The police are there for a job. We must be respectful and polite in our behaviours with them, but as you said, stand and be polite. Don't wilt and acquiesce, because if you acquiesce, you talk too much, you might let them into something you don't want them to know.
But as one thing Charlie did point out, and that most Australians, most Victorians, don't actually know what their rights are under the law. We do not have rights like they have in America that are constitutional rights for this and that. There are certain rights we have if we've been arrested, but as we've just discovered, we don't have the kind of sweeping protections that the Americans have, and which some people would say renders their law enforcement inept in a lot of cases, because they can't act on reasonable suspicions and whatnot often. But here, if you're one of those people who's thinking you don't have to wear a mask in the city of Melbourne or in Victoria at the moment, you do, and you risk a big fine if you get caught the first time, and if you get caught a second time, it's $20,000, and you will not win in front of a magistrate trying to argue that you have some special rights. Oh,
you'll go down. You'll go down big time, and you'll be $20,000 poorer as a result. Coming up next episode of Migrating to Australia, Grant, we're going to talk to an education agent. You and I've talked to her. I've told her that we're not favourites of education agents, but she said, I agree with a lot of what you say about us, but I'm different. And because she contacted me, and because she's a temporary resident herself, because she's from Colombia, I said, well, come on, let's have a chat. And we're looking forward to it. Her name is Laura Parra, and she's up on the Gold Coast. And she is by trade and profession an industrial engineer from one of the finest universities in Colombia. And she's here as a temporary resident, and she's working as an education agent, and she's going to tell us how she's different.
So we'll be doing that on our usual Saturday spot, David. And
Saturday 1:30. Absolutely.
If people want to check out when we are doing live, just like our Facebook page or subscribe on our YouTube page. That's, of course, Migrating to Australia podcast. That's easy to find. David, in the interim, if someone's got an emergency, where do they get hold of you?
The best way, the fastest way is Twitter, direct message at David Bongiorno. So at the @ symbol, David, D-A-V-I-D, Bongiorno, B-O-N-G-I-O-R-N-O, all one word, David Bongiorno. That's the fastest way.
And if you really need to urgently contact me about migration matters, don't.
I'll talk to you on Saturday at 1:30, mate. You have a good day. You have a good week. A good week. God, it's Thursday already. I'll talk to you in 2 days' time.
We're nearly there. We're nearly there.
All this time in COVID, the days lose their distinction. They lose their difference, don't they?
They are turning. One day is turning into another, and I'm only able to tell them apart is to see whether I've run out of lollies from the supermarket.
Ciao, mate.
Cheerio.